One mail server that's pretty common on Linux systems is Postfix. Now, Postfix is a mail server that was designed pretty specifically to be far more secure than some of the other options that were out there. It's designed to be considerably simpler to configure with a number of facilities that are really targeted at preventing abuse of the mail server. So let's take a look at the configuration file for Postfix. The first thing that you want to do is give your system a name so that it can identify itself. If I do an install on a Debian-based system like Ubuntu or one of the Ubuntu derivatives, it's going to do some of the configuration for me. And actually, what I want to do here is I want to edit this. There's a couple of changes that I want to make. And one of them is going to be right here. I want to get rid of this. So I don't want to give an attacker any more information than I absolutely have to. So I'm not going to tell him that it's Ubuntu. It's going to give the attacker information about the package. So it's going to say Postfix, but it's not going to say this is on an Ubuntu system. So try to limit the amount of information as much as possible. Now, we've got an aliases database, and we can use that to set up a number of mailboxes that are pretty common. So you'll need a postmaster mailbox, and an abuse mailbox is something that you are supposed to have as well by way of best practice. So there are a couple of things that we can do here. The first thing that we want to do is prevent relaying through us. So we're going to allow my networks, and my networks here you can see right now is just limited to my local host. So I could also do this, and I could add 172.42.0/24, which is my local network. So basically anybody on my local network is going to be able to use this mail server to communicate with. Permit SASL authenticated. This allows us to do SMTP auth, and there are some additional settings that we need to have here as well. So the first thing that I want to set up is an SMTPD hello restrictions. So SMTPD hello restrictions. This is going to give us a way to cut down on people who are allowed to communicate with us. So any system that tries to send mail to this one has to start with a hello, either HELO or EHLO, depending on whether they're using SMTP or ESMTP. So I'm going to do, again, permit my networks. And then I'm going to say reject non-fully qualified domain name, host name. If you are not using a fully qualified domain name, I'm going to suspect that you are not a properly configured mail server, and I'm just going to reject you. Another thing I can do is reject invalid host name, and that again is going to cut down on bad people trying to communicate through me. And then I got to do a permit, which is basically reject everybody. And then if you don't fall into those categories, you can actually be allowed through. Now, another configuration is SMTPD sender restrictions. And again, I'm going to do permit SASL authenticated. So this is going to allow anybody who has authenticated with us. And again, I'm going to also do permit my networks. Now, the sender restriction is basically anybody who has gotten through the hello now becomes a sender, and now I can do some additional configuration. So I can do reject non-FQDN again. If you were to try to send from root at localhost, for example, well, that's not a fully qualified domain name, so I'm just going to bounce that. I could do unknown sender domain. In this case, I'm just going to do a permit. And then another thing that I can do here is SMTPD recipient restrictions. Another set of permissions that I would need to do here. So I could do, for example, permit my networks again, permit SASL authenticated, reject on-off destination. I can do a reject RBL client. This is a black hole list that is maintained by a couple of different organizations. So here's one, for example. And then I could do another reject RBL client again. I can have a bunch of these. And this is a different black hole list, dsbl.org. And then again, I'm going to do a permit here. You can see that we've got a handful of settings here that we can use to try to limit the people who are communicating with our mail server, so we can stop spam and we can stop unauthorized use of our mail server. Now, there are a number of other things that we can do, for example, gray listing and using a sender policy framework, and we're going to cover those in an upcoming lesson.